Okay. So again, I would like to say thank you all for joining us today with this Face It Lunch and Learn on child trafficking. We are really excited to have folks from the Bakhita Empowerment Initiative at Catholic Charities, Safe Passage, and Maryhurst, and you will be hearing from those folks today. My name is Shannon Moody. I am with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and we are the backbone organization for the Face It movement to end child abuse. And the Face It movement is an initiative of COSAIR Charities, and there are several partner organizations engaged across the state. And we are really excited to have you all joining us today. If you are not aware of what Face It is or who Face It is, go ahead and check out our website, faceitmovement.org, or drop a question in the chat if you would like. So this is a lunch and learn. So if you're planning to eat lunch, feel free to keep your video off or keep it on, totally up to you. I also want to know what you all are eating for lunch because I have not done that yet today, and I'm really interested to see if there's any inspiration in the chat box. So if you want to drop a tasty meal idea in the chat box, please feel free to do so. I would love to hear. Before we get started and jumping in, I see quite a few familiar names. I'm really excited. We've got representation from a lot of different organizations, the courts, the Attorney General's office, other folks are on. I love Blue Dog. Oh my gosh, somebody just said that they were having Blue Dog for lunch. That's a great option for lunch. That sounds awesome. So again, thank you all for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. Again, we've got folks from a couple of different organizations, and I will start with just brief introductions, your name and where you're from, and then we will roll into the questions. So why don't we go ahead and start with Cara Starns.
Hey everyone, my name is Cara. I'm the founder of Safe Passage. Jen is behind me, and we provide survivor-led support services to youth who've been victims of trafficking. We also do prevention programs in the school, training in the community.
Tamar, would you like to go next?
Hello, my name is Tamar Israel, and I'm the Prevention Education Coordinator with Bakhita Empowerment Initiative.
Thank you. And Marsha?
Good lunchtime, everybody. Good to see everybody. Marsha Esarey with Maryhurst. I'm the Vice President of our community-based residential programs and our PRTFs, right? Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facilities. So Maryhurst is certainly a residential treatment facility and a behavioral health services organization. So we serve children in all over the state of Kentucky. Our residential services are for teenage girls. So just wanted to make that distinction. Welcome. Oh, and I did want to start with just sort of setting the tone. I'm a member, and many of you all are as well, a member of the Louisville Metro Human Trafficking Task Force. There's also a statewide task force. A couple of years ago, a student that was working with somebody that was on the task force, I'm not sure who, but Daniel Lee put together a pamphlet that said what you should know about human trafficking. And it's a really good tool that she did. And on the front of that, she used a quote from Pope Francis. And this is what he said about human trafficking. Human trafficking is a crime against humanity. We must unite our efforts to free victims and stop this crime that's become ever more aggressive, that threatens not just individuals, but the foundational values of society. And so I think that's really the challenge that's put forth to us today. So it's a big thing that I'm excited about having so many people here interested in this topic. So thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Marsha. And just a reminder for folks that a lot of what we're talking about today, as you're very well aware, can be quite heavy. can potentially be triggering. So we just want to remind folks to do what you need to make sure that you're taking care of you, and make sure that you're practicing your self-care, whatever that looks like today. So first, we wanted to start off by talking a little bit about what child trafficking is, what the definition is, and then what are some of the patterns and red flags that you see. And I think Cara is going to help kind of illuminate what that looks like and what that means here.
Thanks. Yeah, I can tee it up for us for sure. Diving straight in, human trafficking happens when someone is subjected to forced labor, services, or sexual activity through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Our KRS statute actually uses that particular definition. And to provide further distinction, I know we're talking to a lot of youth service organizations here, and they're usually the ones that ask me, well, what's the difference between sexual abuse and sex trafficking? You know, when does that line cross over? Well, in an abuse case, the perpetrator is abusing and using the victim, but they aren't organizing or receiving a transactional benefit. In a trafficking case, the perpetrators are profiting and benefiting through some type of transaction. They receive something of value, and that's most commonly drugs or alcohol. I mean, drugs or money. And so I think that distinction is really helpful. All sex trafficking is sexual abuse, but sexual abuse is not sex trafficking until the perpetrator is organizing transactions where they receive something of value for what they're forcing the victim to do. I think it's really important that people realize when it comes to minors, we don't need evidence of force, fraud, or coercion. That is also in our KRS statute. We are so glad to see that exception for minors, because previously things like survival sex and child pornography were in this gray area. Because if a kid who was being threatened to lie, said, well, I wanted to do it, then, you didn't have the evidence, okay, against these things that are inappropriately termed as survival sex and child pornography. So we are moving away from those terms because it insinuates a child is in control and making their own decisions. And so we're moving towards terms such as child sexual abuse material. So we've eliminated a lot of gray area for criminal justice cases to move forward, which is really good news. As for things like patterns and red flags, there are so many different ways that child trafficking happens, and no story is ever the same, but we are seeing two pretty top two patterns. And so we see something called familial trafficking or Romeo trafficking. And that just is kind of in terms of who is doing the trafficking. So we see, so familial trafficking is when your family traffics you. And Romeo trafficking, we'll come to that in a minute, but we see the familial trafficking a lot in Kentucky because we have a drug epidemic. And when people are on drugs, they're also jobless. So we see families trafficking their own children in their own homes to receive drugs or money for drugs. Romeo trafficking is when the perpetrators who, through targeting and grooming, has convinced the victim that he or she will love the youth, provide for the youth. So they've made all these false promises to a vulnerable youth. Okay, so we know that 94% of trafficked youth have a previous history in the foster care and child welfare system. So if you've been abused, if you've never been loved or cared for, if there's already a breakdown in the family unit and someone comes along and promises you a better life, sometimes the youth is already looking for an escape. And they're hoping to find that in this person. So it's called Romeo trafficking because these traffickers get many of these victims to believe they love them because you'll do anything and you'll go a long way with a lot of things for someone you love. So if 94% of trafficked youth are coming from the system, that paints a pretty clear picture of who's at risk. So this includes runaway and homeless youth, youth in the group homes, courts, juvenile justice, foster care, and those who have a history of abuse or neglect, and anyone who feels unaccepted or marginalized, such as the LGBTQ youth. So traffickers are targeting our most vulnerable youth who've already, experienced a lot of disappointment and trauma in their life.
So I think Cara obviously shared a lot of really good in-depth information about what trafficking could look like, and some of the most vulnerable to child trafficking. And we know that there are a lot of, like Cara said, youth-serving organizations and agencies on this call. So what kind of role do groups like Maryhurst play in this work? Like, what does that look like, and why is it important for other organizations to get engaged in this?
Based on what Cara was saying, there's just so many critical pieces there. When Maryhurst serves those very youth who are, there's just so many parts of their lives that lend them to being at risk. You think about it, disconnected youth. Youth who don't have strong adult supports or family supports. When I look at the kids that receive treatment and services at Maryhurst and know that they have adults or parental figures who suffer from addiction, and or who no longer have an effect in their life, who are already incarcerated, who aren't in any way accessible to give support to this youth. Those are the real things that all of our youth at some level experience. And then you add just the layer of adolescence, and it isn't by any means, sex trafficking of youth is not just with adolescents, but when I look at our population and the need for youth to have, who are adolescents, to have connection to other peers, to other, whether it's a romantic connection or a significant connection, those things really, they affect their needs for finding those. And if they don't have the adult connection, if they don't have the peer connection, then they're there just waiting on that. So when I think about getting to Shannon's question about what really can, what do we see? The children in our foster care system, they are at the greatest risk for all the reasons that they are in the system. And therefore we have to be on high alert, and we are. We've learned a lot about this reality that human trafficking of children isn't what you saw in the movie Taken. It's really important that people understand that. And as this world of ours becomes more and more technical and global, when kids are online and the use of all kinds of things online, social media, those are ways, think about it. How do you connect? How do you connect with others? And how do you use social media? And so then you see kids who need, or so desperate for that connection, so desperate for a boyfriend, perhaps. And that's all they want, is somebody that they think can love them. So we're on high alert all the time. We've had all kinds of experiences where some of our kids have been trafficked. One of the things that is particularly troubling, but it is a very real part of this, is that our kids don't often define their experience, whatever that trauma is, whatever that crime against them, they don't see it that way. A lot of times they do not see that they are in a situation that would meet that standard. So a lot about what we do is we use the My Life, My Choice curriculum that Tamar may talk more about as we get into this. It's a beautiful thing about relationships and allowing healthy relationships and being connected and taking charge kind of yourself. So that's what I'm gonna stop there.
Marsha, I think that was a really good illustration of why we need to be aware, if we work with youth, of what the risks are. So you all are working with young people who have maybe experienced trafficking or who are at very high risk of experiencing trafficking.
Right.
I think Tamar is more on the front end. Would you talk a little bit about what Catholic Charities Bakhita Empowerment Initiative does?
Absolutely. So Bakhita Empowerment Initiative, we have a prevention education component as well as a direct service. And so I am the prevention education coordinator. So we work in partnership with residential facilities such as Maryhurst, Boys Haven, and Bellwood, just to name a few of them. And so we work with the youth that are in foster care. And so as we realize that they are most at high risk of being trafficked, and so for them to receive education on exactly what commercial sexual exploitation is, and then also for staff members to also be aware of the warning signs. And some things that I have learned from the prevention education groups, as well as Marsha touched on, that a lot of times the youth don't realize that they are victims. I have had some conversations with youth where they said, I went my whole life thinking that this was my fault. Or sometimes they may say, this group has been so helpful, I learned X, Y, and Z. And so they'll disclose some things that they learned from the group, which that's one of the most rewarding parts of co-leading the group. So.
Thank you for that, Tamar. And that it sounds like it's so important to make sure that young people know what it is, even if they've already experienced it, because they might not be connecting it in their minds. So we talked a little bit about what child trafficking might look like. What are some of the common myths or misconceptions that keep us from recognizing more of these modern realities? So Cara, is that something that you can speak to a bit?
Yeah, I can open that up. We have a lot of people come to us and say, I don't come across trafficked youth. And usually after talking to us, that's the last time they say that. But that's because they have been conditioned by Hollywood, Netflix, conspiracy and misinformed social media posts gone viral to look for things like, and I want to be sensitive, but looking for things like kidnapping and smuggling and victims who are locked in trucks and shipments. And those stories do happen. They really do. And I want to make that clear. They do happen. But here's our problem. If we expect that to be the most common form, we're gonna keep missing it, okay? So coercion is actually what our teens in the United States are most at risk for. And unfortunately for us, that's the most difficult method to catch. So, it flies under the radar because it's not as blaringly obvious as being kidnapped or held hostage. It involves much more manipulation and exploitation. And exploitation, I just want you to think about being puppeteered. Imagine you're the puppet, okay? And the puppeteer or the trafficker is pulling on your strings, okay? That's what coercion feels like. It is complex manipulation and exploitation of your needs and vulnerabilities. So we need to look for the visible chains, absolutely, the visible things going on, the more violent forms, but the chances are there are some invisible chains that are controlling the situation the most. So where people are looking for kids to be forcibly taken, I tell them to also look for them to be coercively taken through love and false promises. It's an invisible chain. Where people are looking for these kids to be shackled, I tell them to also look for them to be exploitatively shackled by drugs and alcohol. Where people are looking for signs that they've been held hostage, I tell them to also look for signs that they've been held hostage by threats, violence, and fear. So very often We're missing this because we're looking for visible chains while discounting the invisible ones, which are usually controlling the situation. I think I have just 3 short myths after that one. And so, you know, when people say to me, I don't come across trafficked youth, I just ask them, okay, do you come across runaway and homeless youth? Because 1 in 3 runaway youth are picked up by a trafficker within 48 hours. Do you come across foster care and system involved youth? Because over 90% of trafficked youth come from the system. If you come across these youth, you're coming across trafficked youth. One myth is that women and girls are trafficked, are the only ones trafficked, and we do see boys being trafficked. In the 2020 report by the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the alleged victims were around 80% female and 20% male for youth victims. And a huge misconception is that it's only immigrants who are at risk. They are at risk, but again, they're not the only ones. The 2020 report by CHFS reported that 94% of our alleged victims, minor victims in Kentucky, 94% were American born. So, and people think they're all being taken to other countries, but the majority actually end up being trafficked right here in the United States.
Cara, do you want to talk a little bit about for me, one of the other big myths is that it's going to be on the street. I've got somebody at my door. And we know that that's not necessarily how this happens. That the introduction of the internet is just so deeply involved in child trafficking right now. So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, so if you think about human trafficking 20 years ago, think about how someone had to work really, really, really hard to go out of their way, out of the house, to the mall, to the football game, to the concert, to the park, work really, really hard to target a kid, groom a kid, kidnap a kid, convince a kid, lure a kid, coerce a kid, all doing that in public without getting caught. Today, it has never, ever been easier to traffic a kid because our kids are in one place at one time without supervision. And a trafficker can sit on his rear end on the couch at home, pick up his phone, and access every kid in one place at one time. And all he has to do is crack open a beer and he's just scrolling, looking for kids, messaging kids. And it's as simple as, hey, he sends 100 messages a day and all he's looking for is the one kid who's too bored, too lonely, too vulnerable, too innocent to know better, and they respond. And so we see a lot of targeting online. There's, they groom them by earning their trust over time, okay? It's a lot to go into today, but that's one way we see them being targeted. We see another thing where these traffickers are on TikTok and Snapchat and these types of places and basically catfishing youth. They're setting up profiles of like, oh, I'm a cute 16-year-old boy. You're a cute 16-year-old girl. Let's sext. Guess what? This girl just sent explicit images and videos to a 50-year-old creep in North Korea, and now it's being trafficked millions of times. Did she ever get physically trafficked? No, but her image did.
Thank you.
That's really helpful. I also wonder, with the internet and the accessibility and the apps that are used to target young people, what's something that we can talk to parents or caregivers about to just make them think about, the potential there? Like what's a piece of advice that you give or to a young person, about the internet to just be wary of?
I think one of the things that comes to mind is something that we probably tell our own children, and that's once you put it out there, it's there, and you've handed over a part of yourself that can be there forever, and that just is just the weight of that, the responsibility that each of us have as human beings when we're interacting with the internet, that is, that's just puts you at great risk. That's the first thing that comes to my mind.
I think a lot of times, It happens all the time. I had a parent just the other night say, I'm an educator. None of my parents or fellow educators really want to expose my kids to this. I'm starting to think the kids can handle more than we can. And I've said, yes, our kids are such a thick-skinned generation. Guess what? They're the most exposed generation we've ever had. We need to give them more credit. They want to know what's out there. And so it's up to us. Either we expose them to human trafficking or the streets do. If we do it, hopefully we prevent it. If the streets do it, it's over. So I just encourage parents. I know it's a difficult topic. Let's talk about it. Let's get it in the schools. Let's get community groups going. I know it's an intimidating topic, but we have a lot of hope in this issue, and we would just want to see it end, and let's just talk about it.
I think that's really strong advice, and those conversations are hard. Conversations about body safety, conversations about boundaries, but they're really necessary to make sure our kids know what to be aware of. So when thinking about if a young person does experience trafficking, what are some of the common services that they need in order to heal, in order to recover, in order to process? And Cara or Marsha, either of you, go ahead and jump in on that.
Oh, well, everything that you will find, and there are lots and lots of resources. There are so many tools that are available to everyone, and we will share some of those electronically. But the thing that comes to my mind is how, ask the question again.
What kind of services or supports do people need?
Everything you see will be and should be in a trauma-informed manner, and that is all services related to survivors of trafficking they have been through tremendous trauma. And so there are great tools out there that are trauma informed. And that means your special care in terms of not blaming or shaming, in the ways that you ask questions, in the ways that you screen. We have great tools that really help you determine and ask the questions in a way that that'll open up more conversation. You're talking about individuals who are so guarded and so careful about what they're going to share, and they have many reasons why they should not share with you as you're encountering them. So anything, I see that on the chat, anything that would help with PTSD, absolutely. So because that's what it is. I mean, they're experiencing the complex trauma. I rely so much on the tools that are out there. There are checklists that help you determine whether a child has experienced this. There are wonderful just cheat sheets for red flags, things to watch for. We've already talked some about those, but things that to watch for, unusual tattoos or branding marks. These are really, when you're talking about some of the trafficking that occurs that's pretty organized. There can very well be tattoos and branding marks. You'll hear kids talk about, they'll use certain terms, and things like the life or the game. There are lots and lots of terms like that you watch for. You watch for youth to not be able to make eye contact, or to not really say anything unless they have a sense that the person that's with them, they won't speak for themselves, but they'll be spoken for. somebody that's really, really overly controlling, and again, kind of doing everything for them. Somebody that has multiple cell phones. That's one of those things you kind of look for. What are they carrying around? There used to be kind of the hotel key. Do they have hotel keys? Now that's not as common anymore because of the use of key cards and so forth. But there are a lot of those kinds of things that can tell us. And I just go back to this, how important it is, and how to be sensitive, and the terms that you use, what you say. And Cara hit on this early on about the importance of not referring to youth that have experienced this as victims, not to consider that's because there's so much power and control issues that come with this experience. We have to be really careful about the language that we use. And again, I see organizations like the Louisville Metro Human Trafficking Task Force working really hard at, we're creating an educational tool that really kind of hits on these primary ways that you not just train, but that you screen, how you encounter these young people. And those are just really, I rely on other tools. I really do.
Can I add? Awesome. Yeah, that's good. That's good. You know, the trauma is so complex, and it wraps around so many areas of their life, from setting them back in relationships, safety, their mental and physical health, along with schools and life skills. So truly, these kids need all sorts of support, and they need it over a long period of time. Okay. They need counseling. They need help getting back on their feet and headed in a hopeful direction. They need encouragement to keep dreaming and setting goals for their life, despite anyone who ever told them they weren't worth it. So they need a lot, and it can't be a quick fix. It has got to come from the heart. So we have got to be in this for the long term and the right reasons. So we've been seeing two big gaps. We've been seeing, you know, these kids are getting great counseling and case management and all that kind of stuff. But we were saying, I feel like these trafficked youth are kind of being generically lumped into the same case plans as other trauma, and with complex trauma related to trafficking and the trauma bond of the abuser. We really saw, okay, first of all, these kids really aren't getting help that is relevant to overcoming trafficking trauma. And part of the problem is, we don't have enough survivors working on the front line to help educate us and intervene. Because when you're in the fire, okay, when you want to talk to someone else who's already come through the fire, okay, how many of you have had a kid sit down across from you and say, you don't know what I've been through? Okay, we need to listen to that and not take offense to that. We need to get them in front of people who've actually already come out of that fire and know the way. So our first gap was, all right, we're not seeing relevance with the services, great services, no relevance. Number two was great services, but it ends and they lose relationship, because our system's overcrowded. And I think as the community, we do our very, very best to give these kids our all. But our frontline, providers have toppling caseloads. And kids are finishing their case plans, and once those plans end, kids go back to usually the same or similar lives as before. And when they go back home, they don't get to take their counselor or clinician or Marsha with them, okay? And studies show that having a supportive mentor, especially a survivor mentor, helps break the cycle of trauma and backtracking. So we're seeing kids recycle through more and more trauma and recycle through the system, because next time they come to another fire, they're still on their own and they don't have a supportive mentor to be with them in the long term. So they don't have mentors. And when it comes to human trafficking, these kids aren't connected to someone who understands. So we'll talk about that, I think, later, but that's what we've been working on at Safe Passage, is providing those survivor-led support services to these kids. I think that's pretty important in this day and age to start moving towards that.
So, thinking about those services that support young people, and we talked a little bit about that, particularly for the organizations that you represent. What kind of services or supports do you come along with and utilize for young people and or other providers or partners? And I'd like to hear from Tamar, because looking at the kind of the spectrum, starting with prevention.
Absolutely. So Catholic Charities Bakhita Empowerment Initiative. So we are committed to combating and bringing awareness to human trafficking. And Bakhita Empowerment Initiatives, prevention education, has a prevention education component. And so we have 2 prevention education curriculums that we follow. We have the My Life, My Choice, which is for adolescent female youth, identifying adolescent female youth. We have I Am, which is for identifying male youth. And so these curriculums are usually a 10-week curriculum course. And so I also have more details about this. Tina will provide more detailed information, but these groups are held in churches, community centers, schools, residential facilities. And so these groups are to bring awareness to the topic and to also educate our youth. So we don't only speak about commercial sexual exploitation, we also speak about things like substance abuse, self-esteem, what are warning signs. So we talk about a large range of topics in these groups. And then we also, our groups are also survivor-led. We have contract work with Donna Polar. So her and I co-lead several of our groups. And even if she's not able to co-lead our groups, then it's a section in the group where they get to hear from a survivor of commercial sexual exploitation. And so Donna usually comes in and tells her story during this session. And I always say with the youth, this is the time that we always hear, we can hear a pin drop during this moment. So that's a very impactful part.
And there's so much energy, Tamar, that you have for it. It's really inspiring to think about having you come in or being part of that and the energy that you bring. It's refreshing. So thank you.
Yes,
for that.
and then I also learned too that the youth also feed off of my energy too, or they feed off of our energy, because we discuss some very, 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 very touchy topics. So just to make sure that they understand that, this is a safe place to have great conversations. And that's usually what I tell them. This is a great place to have very good conversations. So we ask them to be vulnerable, but also they get a chance to put us in the hot seat and ask us any questions that they may have also.
Yeah, absolutely. So once, we learn a little bit about prevention and what that prevention can look like, when it gets to the point where we're identifying somebody who has experienced trafficking, I think that's where Cara and Marsha come in and provide services. So would you all want to talk a little bit about more in depth on like what that service, what those services look like in practice from your all's organization?
Hey, Cara, why don't you describe the program that you and Jen are about to launch a little bit more? Because I think that's just in terms of that healthy relationships and mentoring kind of thing.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so we do prevention in the schools and we do trainings in the community, but our whole heart has been, listen, we know these victims are in the community, and also there's a huge issue with they're all over the place. They are spread out. How do we create, how do we get to them? How do we support these victims and the community? And so at Safe Passage, we have designed a community-based service that is survivor-led. You see Jen in the background. She's the rock star of that. She herself is a survivor of human trafficking. She is our director of family support services. I think she posts our website, so you can always find out more there. But so what we did was we developed a community-based service. So when it's like, if, the courts call us or law enforcement call us, we're able to go to wherever the kid is, whether that's at DJJ, whether that's at Maryhurst, whether that's in foster care, in their bio home, wherever it is. This community-based service is able to meet that kid where they're at, work with Jen one-on-one, survivor to survivor, to help them break out of the trafficking, break out of old cycles and backtracking, truly understand from one survivor to another. I know sometimes you don't feel like a victim victim. I know you love your trafficker and who did this to you, and you're bonded, but like, can I talk to you? You know, and so the thing is, you know, these kids are only in the residential placements, DJJ, wherever they are, they're only there temporarily, okay? But there comes a point when that case plan ends, they go back home. Well, with Jen's able to keep going wherever they are. And so by running groups in the residential homes, by working with some of these youth serving agencies, we're able to meet these kids in certain places. And once they leave, they've developed this relationship with Jen where she's able to mentor them for a long time. So that's our hope, is providing survivor-led mentorship and support services for these youth who are victims. Runaway youth are particularly at risk. And so that is our heart. I feel like I did a good job. I don't know if I missed anything.
I don't think so. I think that was great.
Cara is a wealth of knowledge too, obviously. Marsha, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think it's a little bit harder for Maryhurst because Cara has made a really good point when she talks about how survivors of human trafficking or at high risk are, there's some really unique needs that they have. And the kids that we serve at Maryhurst have many of those needs, but they may not have all, or most of them have not necessarily had this victimization. And so it's our model of treatment is heavy on trauma informed. It's heavy on teaching healthy relationships, decision-making skills, those kinds of things that are all at the root of what will strengthen youth who have experienced this. It doesn't have, we don't have the distinct work that Cara has necessarily. We really do serve them and serve them well, but when we don't have a survivor necessarily that serves that role, like Safe Passage has, like what My Life, My Choice brings. We really use the folks at Bakhita to bring that to us. We do tremendous treatment on all levels of treatment. I mean, tremendous treatment on all levels of trauma, but we see these kids, we know their needs, and we really use the services of the community.
Yeah, that partnership is so critical.
Yes.
To make sure that our kids are being served and our young people are being served in the way that is best for them too. We can't be everything to everyone.
Right.
And when we can bring in other partners who really know their stuff, know what to look for, know how to educate, we're just really, we're doing it in an efficient and smart way. So partnership is critical, and reaching out to folks who understand this can help to, really bring groups together and help create some synergy around it as well. I did have a question before we get to the last question about taking action, which is my favorite way to kind of end. I had a question about if you are talking to a young person and in that conversation you recognize or learn that they are potentially being exploited or coerced or experiencing trafficking, what do you do? How do you respond to that? What I don't know what I would do. So what does that look like?
I mean, I think everyone's like, I don't know what I would do. And I think, just to reassure you, no one knows what they would do until they get in that situation. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the front line. It's always, always, always hard. It's always overwhelming and intimidating. So I think that is a common feeling. I would say, when it comes to minors, we have absolutely everyone is a mandated reporter. And so that mandated report makes it pretty easy. It says, even if you suspect child abuse, neglect, or human trafficking, you need to make a report. And so if you're sitting there like, I don't know what human trafficking looks like, I know this kid's probably being abused, that it really takes out the gray area. If we suspect, we need to report. And so that's that reporting hotline. We can Google it. I don't know if Marsha, you might be able to post it in the chat, but if you just were to Google, I need to make a report in Kentucky, it's right there. But for human trafficking, you can always call the human trafficking hotline and make a report. They have a system where it goes through Kentucky from DCBS to the police and to other referrals. You could always call Catholic Charities when it comes to minors, and you think, hey, this kid really needs some survival support services and some help there. You can call Safe Passage. Those are all for services. But if you feel like there is a case at hand, you do need to report that to the state, and go ahead and do it to the state first, and then the human trafficking hotline. And then when it comes to support, that's your next step, is calling one of us, I think.
Thanks, Cara. And if I could just join in to say, usually with prevention education groups, if we have a youth disclose, then myself, and there's always a therapeutic staff that's also in the room. So we work very closely together throughout the 10 weeks that this curriculum may go on at their facility. And so we are all mandated reporters. So we will make sure before a group is over with, we want to make sure that they're well-being and that there's no safety risk. So, but if they do report a new disclosure, or if they report a disclosure, then we do report it to Child Protective Services. And we also make sure that that youth has that support throughout the day and also throughout the week if they need it.
Awesome, thank you. And we can include that hotline number in the follow-up email for folks as well. We've got
The last thing that I would say about when I think about Maryhurst and I think about other facilities like us, our clinicians they're real experts. They're experts at certainly seeing the kinds of things that happen to kids, and they there's almost it's almost instinctual for them now, where they know those red flags, and so they respond with the tools of reporting, and they will not hesitate. That's what we are. It's not that we're looking for it, but our folks, the hair stands on the back of their necks when and right away, one of my clinicians will begin a process of talking with the treatment team about, this is something that I heard, and really getting into and exploring what might that be, and then making a plan, and what's the next steps in terms of treatment for that child. So when you work with adolescents, it's important that you have, certainly adolescents who've experienced trauma, it is really important that you know what to listen for and what to look for so that you can be ready. So I think that's really what I see us do. So
thanks for that, Marsha. So if we suspect or there's a disclosure, we're going to make a call because we're mandated reporters. And Jennifer Beagle included that link. We'll also include it in the follow-up, but I appreciate that hands-on right away. So thinking about if folks are inspired to take some action, like I want to know what I can do to prevent child trafficking from ever happening, or I want to know what I can do to take action and be supportive. What is one thing that you would tell folks, just one idea, one way for them to take action as they move on throughout their day, as they go into the weekend, or think about the work that they do, day to day? What's one action step that they can take? And that is for any folks. Go ahead and all three of you.
I'll start. Learn more. I know a number of people on this call right now, and I know many of you all already have a wealth of knowledge, and you guys are more expert in many regards than I am or anybody at Maryhurst. But you cannot not learn more. I am optimistic and encouraged by some of the efforts about bringing more attention to the need. And there are lots and lots of ways of doing that. I've already said, use the resources that are out there. We've got a lot of things that we'll include in our links, but there's a lot of national resources, and the state of Kentucky has done some very, very good work, and they continue to make this a priority. So learn more is what I would say.
Great. And what I would suggest, if individuals are interested, then they could become training facilitators over the My Life, My Choice curriculum. And there's an upcoming training in March. If anyone is interested, I could post that link in the chat. And then also, at your agency, if you wanted to host or organize a My Life, My Choice group, then we have staff members at Bakhita Empowerment that could facilitate those groups if interested.
I think there's a lot of options on the table. And so I think my advice is assess your influence and use it. So there are so many options. What's your influence? Do something today. It's like all of us are ready. Our sleeves are rolled up. We're ready to be hands on deck. And all we need is an open door and an invitation. So if you're in the police, if you're in the courts and you work with youth and you just want us to come present to your group, whether that's doing a training or just presenting about our services, any group is ready to do that. If you're in the education system or you have youth in your influence and you want to bring in prevention and intercession sessions, both me and Tamar do that. I think there's a lot of options. I would encourage you, assess your influence and send an email to one of these three ladies before we finish. Just get started.
Thank you so much for that. Is there a trusted source that you direct folks to? I saw a question about who do we listen to? Is there a key trusted source? I think Polaris is maybe one. Are there other sources that you direct people to outside of your own organizations?
Yeah, the Office of Victims of Crime, OVC, and we'll put that in there too. They've got a training and technical center. So they offer training, they offer some screening tools, lots and lots of things like that. So I think that's a big one. There's also the Office of Trafficking in Persons. It's OTIP, I think. But again, we can put that in the link, but that's another one that does a ton of work. These are national resources. Our Attorney General's office here in the state of Kentucky has been really, really involved. And I saw a quick chat come across about that, and I was glad they put some resources in there too, because they're doing, there's a new initiative that was mentioned that I don't know much about, but so I think there's Polaris, and Polaris has done a ton of research. So they've got a lot of, statistics and data. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is operated by Polaris. So those are connected. And then those OVC and the Office of Trafficking in Persons are two big national groups.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. It sounds like you all are going to have a wealth of information in that follow-up email. There is a question in the chat about potential Romeo trafficking with young adults. I don't know if that's something that you all could attend to in the chat and respond to in the chat, if at all possible, as we kind of close out. We are so grateful to have Tamar, Cara, and Marsha be our experts today on this topic, and we are so thankful that you all have joined us. and spent your lunch hour. Hopefully you all did get to eat lunch while we were learning more about this really important topic and just getting more informed. There's always ways to learn more about this. Again, we will send out links for information. Please feel free to reach out to any of those groups. And don't be afraid to get involved and take action in the ways that they had talked about. There's a lot of opportunity. We will, this is again recorded. We will put this link up and send it out to folks when it is ready, probably next week, so that if you want to share it with folks, we are happy to have that. And again, thank you all so much for your time. And please take care of yourselves today and have a great weekend. Thank you all.